Long Bay Jail was opened in 1909 as a state-of-the-art reformatory which featured such modern luxuries as lights and working sewers. Today, it is known as one of Australia's most infamous prisons and has housed some of the most infamous and worst criminals in Australia's history. To celebrate the release of Australia's hardest prison, written by myself, James Phelps, today we've got Grant Turner with me, who's a guard that worked at Long Bay, and we're going to talk about some of the history of the jail and also some of the characters and also what it's like to be a guard looking after some of these dangerous men. G'day Grant, how are you?
Good, thank you, James.
So Grant, how long did you spend at the jail?
All up, I was in corrective services for 11 years and the majority of that time was at Long Bay.
And what's Long Bay like, mate? It's a very intimidating place to look at. We've got the barbed wire, we've got the classic old architecture. I mean, it must be a pretty intimidating place to walk into.
It is. For your first venture into the place, it's pretty intimidating, but after a while, just like any job, it becomes a job.
And what were your first impressions when you sort of came up against some of these hardened crims? And I mean, did you know any of the reputations in there and when you met these people?
Yeah, it's a bit of deer in the headlights stuff when you first walk in there because you're just in awe of everything and you're trying to stay on top of everything because you've got so many things to remember. But once you get into the swing of it, it's literally just a job.
Now, Long Bay was opened over 100 years ago as a women's reformatory first, and then men came in 6 years later. And it was originally just an overflow for the main jail in Sydney, and it quickly became the highest security jail in Australia and housed some of the worst. I mean, we had guys like Darcy Dugan, and then going on to the great robbers and murderers. I mean, the Razor Gang women were in there, Tilly Devine. And over the years, we've seen some of the worst and most notorious especially. One of those is Nettie Smith. He's been in there in and out since the 70s. He's a permanent resident now. I mean, that guy really ran the jail for a period of time there, didn't he?
As far as the inmates go, he was the king of them for a long time, and his reputation was, it's Australia-wide, isn't it?
And he was feared by the other prisoners?
Absolutely, yeah. I wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of him on that side of it.
And some of the classics that sort of I've heard speaking to other guards throughout it is, he'd go to get his medication in the morning and there'd be a line full of 30 or 40 people lining up. And all of a sudden, Nettie would walk in and the line would disperse and they'd all move backwards and wait for Nettie to get to the front of the line and they didn't say anything.
Quite often he'd take charge of a situation in that regard, and he was given a little bit of leeway from the other inmates, so he would take advantage of that. And
also some I've spoken to claim that he had his own fridge in his cell with beer and food and TV and lounge chairs. It was a bit like a little palace, like Pablo Escobar almost.
Oh, I've never seen the beer, but he had it as a sweeper. He had a little bit better than everybody else.
Now, one thing that we covered off in the book is the ghost stories. I mean, a place with that much history. I mean, we had gallows there that executed a number of people, and the cell outside, which was called the condemned cell, is believed to be haunted. And a number of guards have seen ghosts out there, haven't they?
There's a lot of people that claim that it's haunted, and I know that when the old Long Bay Hospital used to exist, the A ward down there, there was every nurse that ever worked there said that it was haunted because they worked there overnight and there's nobody else around.
As a guard, mate, you've obviously been in some pretty heavy situations. Riots, they do go on and they are pretty serious, aren't they?
They don't call them riots anymore. They call them incidents now, but no matter what they call it, it's heavy stuff. Once the tear gas starts and the batons start and everything, you hear the screaming and even the gunshots. It's full on. You line up at the gate, and usually as an officer, the average officer will get called to a specific area where he's got to respond to. From there, he'll put on his gear, his riot gear, and then he'll be taken to a position, and that position could be well out of the way or right in the middle of it. And if he's not switched on, he'll learn very quickly.
And this book pays tributes to the guards, who are really the unsung heroes of our government employees. They don't get the recognition that police officers do or some of our other emergency workers. But two have died in Long Bay. One guy was viciously beaten with a hammer. His name was John Newburn, just while unlocking a gate. And another young guy, Jeffrey Pearce, was injected with AIDS. It was actually the only ever prick that related to a infection. And mate, you yourself have been attacked while in there. You were punched one day by an inmate.
Yeah, I've been in quite a few arguments between inmates and officers.
And I guess when we think of prisons, aside from the inmates, we think of the escapes. And there's been many of those at Long Bay, and some have been brutal with shootings and hurt people, but other ones have been quite funny, if you can call an escape funny, which I'm referring to Robert Cole, who actually dieted and got himself so small he could slip between the bars.
Yeah, Robert lost a lot of weight and went through the bars and over the fence, and they caught him up Bondi Junction with a...
Now this is the funny bit. We don't want to make light of an escape.
No,
but
absolutely
it was
not.
how he was caught that was more amusing. How was that, Grant?
He had, when they brought him back into custody, he had texture all over his face where he'd used a marker to draw a beard on himself to try to look like he wouldn't stand out, but it had the opposite effect.
And another big problem that everyone has found in jail is the drugs. And I mean, you guys seized a hell of a lot while you were in there, and it was a big problem, and you guys took it seriously, didn't you?
Yeah, it's still a big problem. There's not a great deal you can do. A jail is literally a miniature society. Just like outside, there's people that want to use drugs inside. Even more so, it's more condensed, but getting the drugs in there is the hardest thing for them, and they're constantly coming up with new ways of doing it.
And violence is a real thing in prison.
Absolutely.
I mean, inmates are bashed quite often. They're stood over. There's been multiple murders inside the jail. I mean, how do these young inmates that come in, and who are the most vulnerable, and what sort of things happen to them?
Yeah, younger inmates are most vulnerable. If they're not within an organised group straight away, they should find one, and they usually do. Usually a sweeper will take them under the wing and push them in the right direction. If they can't get that, they will, and if they don't want that, they will soon find that it's not a nice place to be.
So they're stood over for things like their shoes initially. If they don't comply, they'll get a beating. And
shoes, food, smokes, clothes, pretty much anything they can give them.
And eventually they'll be asked to do certain jobs for them, which might even entail, smuggling in drugs somehow. Or
sure. Yeah, and even their families, they'll get inducted into a gang, and their families on the outside will have to pay some sort of remuneration to assist their protection.
All right, well, there's some of the stories that feature in Long Bay, and there's plenty more, and it's available from sale from the 1st of August.